Morning or afternoon, everyone. So, depending on whether you're joining us from the UK or the US or Canada, we just wanted to say a big thank you for joining us today to hear a bit more about this exciting collaboration between UK Research and Innovation, the Natural Science Foundation in the US, and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research in Canada. Next slide, please. So I'm Wendy Matcham. I'm the Head of Research for Environmental Hazards and Health at the Natural Environment Research Council, and I'm the lead within UK Research and Innovation for this recently launched Enhancing Resilience to Wildfires in the Wildland-urban Interface programme. Today, I'm joined by colleagues from UKRI, so from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, from the Economic and Social Research Council, and from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. I'm also joined by my funding partner colleagues from NSF, NSERC, SHERC, and CIHR. So it's absolutely brilliant to see so many of you here and interested in this call. The funders are absolutely just delighted that we're able to get to this point and that we can now share details with you. Next slide, please. So we have about an hour for this webinar, which I'm sure will go by really quickly. So we'll try to be as succinct as we can. I'll give you some background and rationale to the call in a moment, and then I'll pass over to my funding partners who will give you some details about how your communities in the United States, Canada, and the UK can engage with this call. We'll then give you some details about how to apply, and we'll move into the formal kind of question and answer section of the webinar after that. So as we've only got an hour, we might not be able to answer all of your questions, but please be assured that we will answer them. If we don't get to answer them live in this webinar, we will then put answers to them in our FAQ document, which will be circulated to all attendees after the webinar and also published on our website. So just some notes for you before we formally begin. We've collected names and institutions and short biographies from everyone that's registered for this webinar and chosen to give us that information. So we will share that with everyone afterwards. So there's no need for you to post any of that information in the chat for this webinar. Please make sure that you only post questions in the question and answer section, because we won't be monitoring the chat function in that way, but we'll select questions out of the Q&A section. We will be answering pre-submitted questions first and then moving on to those that are coming through the live Q&A section. And as I mentioned, we might not be able to answer all of them here now, but we will provide answers to them at some stage. Next slide, please. Okay, so just moving on to the programme overview. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we're so excited to be able to launch this programme. The conversations for a potential programme on wildfire started back in 2022 between Natural Environment Research Council and NSF. And then in 2023, NERC commissioned a group of rotators to review and report on the gaps and opportunities for wildfire research between the UK and the US. The report highlighted lots of different aspects of wildfire research that's needed and that's important, but we were specifically looking for interdisciplinary topics where there would be value added by working across these specific nations. And then in 2025, we were extremely excited for Canada to join the funding partnership for this programme and to help us expand the scope to allow for research that would have the most impact across these three countries. Next slide, please. So why wildfires? They're becoming more frequent, severe and unpredictable across the globe and are impacting the lives of millions of people. So these changes in behaviour and occurrence are affecting how we understand, prepare for and respond to wildfire events in different nations. And therefore, it's never been more important for us to come together collectively to increase knowledge and to find solutions. So one area that was highlighted as being particularly important were fires at the wildland-urban interface, because behaviour can change unpredictably in those spaces. And many of the current models don't yet accurately allow for extreme events. So as a result, we've launched this trilateral partnership. And then in terms of UKRI strategic interest, this area aligns with one of our priorities at the moment, which is on climate adaptation, environment and resilience. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overview of the scope, this research programme will fund essential interdisciplinary research into the wildland-urban interface. It will catalyse new and existing collaborations and strengthen capacity amongst researchers across various jurisdictions in the UK, the US and Canada, or both. And it will enhance resilience to wildfire risk in the wildland-urban interface, for example, environmental, structural, health or community at the local, regional or national scale. The programme will achieve this through the following three aims. Aim 1, to enhance knowledge and understanding of the risks and vulnerabilities of wildfire occurrence, intensity, behaviour and spread within the wildland-urban interface under evolving and future fire regime scenarios. Aim 2, to investigate impacts, for example, environmental, social, cultural, human health, economic or built environment of wildfire occurrence in the wildland-urban interface. And aim 3, to develop interventions and solutions for adaptation, mitigation and recovery to wildfire in the wildland-urban interface. So applications are required to demonstrate how they will advance knowledge and produce solutions-focused outcomes against the programme aims. And applications must address at least 2 of the programme aims, at least 2 of those 3 aims listed above, and one of those must be aim 3. Next slide, please. So finally, from me, just some key points about the programme. So all projects must be collaborative. They must be one of the following collaboration configurations. So it can be all 3 countries, the UK, the US and Canada, or a combination of the UK with the US or the UK with Canada. Each UK component can request up to 1,575,000, and UKRI will pay up to 80% of this full economic cost. Matched equivalent resources are anticipated from the participating funders, and there is a mandatory expression of interest stage for this. So have a look on the COOL website to find out when you need to submit that. So no projects will be able to go through to the full stage unless they've submitted in that expression of interest stage. So UKRI grants must start by the 12th of February 2027. Projects must be interdisciplinary. And that's on the UK side, all applications must cover at least 2 UKRI council remits. So just to note as well that we're so the Arts and Humanities Research Council, the Natural Environment Research Council, Engineering and Physical Research Council, and the Economic and Social Research Council, part of UKRI, are all present on this call, but you could also submit if you represent a remit from one of the other research councils that are not represented here today from UKRI. Next slide, please. So now I'll move over to my colleague, Kendra McLaughlin from the National Science Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. So yes, hello, I'm Kendra McLaughlin. I'm a program officer at the U.S. National Science Foundation, and I'm also the chair of our Wildland Fire Initiative Working Group at NSF. So we are just delighted to be here on this webinar today and to join in this unique trilateral funding opportunity that we really think is poised to forward wildland fire science in innovative new ways. So I just have a few slides here to just kind of frame up the US perspective in terms of this trilateral opportunity. Again, we just have the one logo, NSF, but we've worked pretty hard over the last few years to unify ourselves around wildland fire science. I did want to provide this email address to everyone, which is wildlandfire@nsf.gov. That is a shared email inbox that reaches many folks who are working on wildland fire science at NSF. So I think I wanted to make that a resource for any of our US-based investigators who may have questions about this program. So the next slide. I think have kind of made this point a little bit already, but we have worked very hard to coordinate ourselves internally at the National Science Foundation around wildland fire science. As Wendy said, these conversations have been going on for several years. We realized very early on that all of our directorates were funding wildland fire science in various formats, and we really needed to coordinate ourselves a little bit better to make sure we were making strategic investments and coordinated investments and getting that innovation piece that we really value at the National Science Foundation. So we did form this working group made of program officers from around the foundation. Again, we do have this single email address that you can reach us all at anytime. And I do want to just briefly read off these science areas here, because you'll hear from our partner agencies that many of these science areas are also represented in their agencies. So we do have the Directorate for Biological Sciences, which I am actually housed in. My home area is ecosystem science. Also our computer science directorate, engineering, geosciences, mathematical and physical sciences, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, STEM education, technology, innovation, and partnerships, as well as our Office of International Science and Engineering. And that last entity has really been the one that's pioneered this trilateral collaboration here between the UK and Canada and the US. And so we're just very grateful, again, for this opportunity to join the call. So I think we just have one more slide, which is that, I just wanted to be very clear that NSF does have a different funding opportunity that is not trilateral, that is with some other partners in the US. And but that program might provide helpful context for this funding opportunity. And so I just wanted to make everyone aware that there is this existing Fire Science Innovations through Research and Education program. It has a different application number. The goal of that program is similar to this program, and in fact was developed in conversations with our UK partners to support innovative multidisciplinary and multi-sector investigations, focus on convergent research and education activities in wildland fire. So one of the tracks in that program is Fire WUI, and which is to decrease vulnerability of the built infrastructure and at the wildland-urban interface. So just to kind of clarify that program is not this program, but there may be some text there in that funding opportunity that clarifies a little bit more about what NSF's original interests were in the Fire WUI space, and may help you find some context and some words for that track within the fire program. Okay, so I'm feeling like maybe I didn't clarify anything there, particularly useful if you do have questions, but we can definitely take them. I do want to provide one more resource in the chat, which is a general web page that we've developed at NSF about wildland fire science. And so this includes not just that program, but like many other types of funding opportunities and things. So if you're looking for more of an overview of like what the US portfolio is looking like, there is that web page. And then if you are just kind of interested in general what awards have been made in wildland fire at NSF, it's quite overwhelming, but we do recommend that you just go to the simple awards search and type in wildland fire or wildfire, and just kind of see what types of things NSF has funded in the past. Again, this is just context for this new and exciting call that we're happy to join the UK on. All right, so I think that's it from me.
Great, thanks very much, Kendra. So now moving on to my colleague Kate Hembest from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully, I think my sound is working, so that's great. So I'm a Deputy Director, Kate Hembest, with NSERC, with the Strategic Partnerships team. And I'm joined on the call as well by colleagues at NSERC, as well as SSHRC and CIHR. So Canada's participation in this call is coming from the three tri-agencies on the Canadian side. And I will just say, I'll be speaking in English, but feel free to ask your questions in French. We also have a Canadian web page on the NSERC website for all of the details of this call for Canadian researchers, available in both English and French. So please do check that out. And I'll move to the next slide, Natasha, please. So quick overview of our funding. So NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR each plan to invest $3 million for this call. So there'll be a total of $9 million for Canadian research support. This works out to about 4 projects per agency, although of course it'll depend what comes in and what gets selected. Each project can request budget from 1, 2, or all 3 Canadian funders. So in that sense, we encourage interdisciplinary projects on the Canadian side, but there is some flexibility there for the Canadian component. So your maximum budget request is 250,000 Canadian per year per Canadian funder, okay, for the 3-year span of the project. So important to note that each of the 3 Canadian agencies will be funding research within each of our specific mandates. So if your project, the Canadian component of it, is focused, say, on the natural sciences, then you would request budget from NSERC, and you would have a 750,000 Canadian maximum budget request. If the Canadian portion of the project is really goes across the tri-agencies mandates and is very interdisciplinary, then you might request budget for the natural sciences and engineering part from NSERC, as well as the social sciences part from SSHRC, as well as the health part from CIHR. And your maximum at that point would be 750K per agency, which is 2,250,000. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the funding. In terms of eligibility, there is 1 Canadian project lead who's identified in the UKRI application. This person is also the primary applicant for the NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR grants to ultimately get the funding. So that person must be a Canadian university researcher, so someone whose primary affiliation is with a Canadian university that has full institutional eligibility for NSERC, SSHRC, or CIHR. Of course, the Canadian research team might involve more people. You might have co-applicants who can also access grant funds and who would need to meet our eligibility requirements. You can also have collaborators and partner organizations who wouldn't have direct access to grant funds, could be from any sector. I'll move to the next slide, Natasha, please. So how do you actually apply? So for the Canadian side of things, we're going to be using the UKRI application as much as possible for the review process, for the decision process. So that means the Canadian project lead needs to work closely with the UK project lead to make sure the Canadian components are well reflected in that single collaborative application. So take a look at the UKRI instructions, especially the Canada component section, and you'll see that we require these 3 components. So the most important, and it'll be applicable for everybody, is the budget documents. So NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR need to know what budget you're requesting from each of us. And we've provided templates for you to use for that. So you're attaching 1 budget per funder, per Canadian funder that you're requesting money from. And there are 2 tabs within that budget template. The first, you're listing your expenditures and your budget justification. it'll look the same as you see on the Canadian granting council websites. And then the second tab, you're listing your research team members and, if any, partner organizations as well. So that's the first component. Second component is whether you decide whether your application aims to advance a sensitive technology research area. If it does, you need to fill and submit an attestation form, a STRAC attestation form for each researcher with a named role. If it doesn't aim to advance one of these areas, you don't have to submit anything there. And then thirdly, if your research involves a private sector partner organization, so a company, then you need to submit the risk assessment form. Again, this is for research security purposes. So you have the link to the webpage, you have our email address if you have questions, and I will leave it at that for the Canadian component. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Kate. And now handing over to Michelle Manning to speak to the UK engagement for this call.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Tash, for the slide. Yes, hello everyone. I'm really glad that you could join us today. So I'm Michelle Manning and I'm at NERC at UKRI, and I'm just going to talk briefly about UK engagement. So let me see, next slide. Thank you, Tash. So the call is published under UKRI standard eligibility criteria, and eligible organisations are listed here on the left-hand side of the slide. It is worth noting that non-standard eligibility does not apply to this call, so organisations not eligible to be funded through the call are on the right-hand side of the slide and include charities, non-governmental organisations, government departments, third sector, social enterprises and other educational establishments. You can see the full call webpage on the UKRI website for further full details on both organisational and individual eligibilities. So if your organisation does not come under standard eligibility requirements, then you're still welcome to be part of the project team applications as self-funded project partners. And again, all the details for that are also on the UKRI webpage. Next slide, please, Tash. So I think Wendy's already mentioned at the start of the webinar here that this is a cross UKRI funding opportunity. So all council remits are included, as long as your application on the UK component covers at least 2 of them. You can find further information on our council remits online at our UKRI website. And the call has been devised, as Wendy said, across NERC, EPSRC, AHRC and DSRC, and we're joined today by our colleagues from those councils. And you might see natural fits amongst these remits within the call. However, teams are free to construct their application as best fits the programme aims, and your application will be assessed on how you best demonstrate and articulate in your application how you will achieve the programme aims. So not restricted through council remits. We have a maximum funding per award of £1.575 million at 100% FEC, which we will award at our standard 80% FEC terms unless specified otherwise. Next slide, please. So we've listed here some indicative areas of remit interest, spanning the environmental, engineering, social and arts and humanities spaces. Although, as I mentioned, applications can cover all remits of UKRI councils. And please note that this is not a list of what we expect to see in applications, and it's also not an exhaustive one. It's just an indicative remit topic areas that you might wish to look at. So thank you very much. I think I'll pass to Tash now for the next item.
Thank you, Michelle. So I am Natasha Suter. I am a program manager within NERC, and I'm just going to speak a bit about how to apply, the assessment process, and the timeline for this funding opportunity. So how to apply, as mentioned at the start, we do have a mandatory expression of interest stage for this funding opportunity. So on the full funding opportunity webpage, under the section how to apply, if you expand that section, there will be more details on the expression of interest stage, as well as the link to take you to the expression of interest form. So all applications should submit an expression of interest, but we understand that nothing provided at that stage is considered finalised, and you will complete the expression of interest at the best of your ability at that time. So things can change, but this gives us an opportunity to inform plans for our assessment panel, but also address any potential eligibility or remit queries at that stage. Not every expression of interest will receive a response. So if you have not received a response by the 14th of August, then please proceed to submit your full application. But if you do hear from us, then it will just be to sort of clarify eligibility and give you a chance to perhaps make any changes that you might need to make to ensure that your project is eligible. So the deadline for the expression of interest stage is the 30th of July 2026 at 4 p.m. UK time. And when you do click on that link there, it will just take you to a page that looks like this, and then you can click the bottom link with the red circle around it to complete the EOI form. And for the second stage is the full application process. So the funding opportunity is being run on the UKRI funding service. So please do ensure that the project leads organisation is registered. So only the UK lead research organisation can submit the application to UKRI. So the UK project lead is responsible for completing the application on the funding service, but we expect all team members and project partners to contribute to the application. So it is one collaborative application submitted by the UK project lead, and that title is purely for administrative purposes. So yes, the links for the expression of interest stage and to start your full application are on the funding opportunity webpage. And the first point of call for queries will probably be the TFS help desk, but we also have a shared mailbox, wildfires@nerc.ukri.org, where you can contact the programme team as well. So for the assessment process, the assessment process will be an assessment panel. So all participating funders will contribute to convening one panel of independent international experts who will make a funding recommendation. So the assessment process is one joint process. There will be no response stage for this funding opportunity, so the proposed projects will be assessed purely on their application against the published assessment criteria. As you're completing the application, there will be guidance around the assessment criteria. It will say what the assessors are looking for in your response. So for more information on how applications are assessed, there is a link on the webpage, and we will share these slides afterwards so that you can click on all the links. And just to show you an overall timeline for this funding opportunity. So the funding opportunity and the expression of interest stage opened on the 2nd of July. We are currently in our webinar for potential applicants on the 9th of July. And then the expression of interest stage will close on the 30th of July. The funding opportunity will close on the 1st of October at 4 p.m. UK time. We aim to hold the assessment panel in November, and then for the UKRI grants, project should start no later than 12th of February 2027, and we would expect all sort of components to align, but sort of within around that date where possible. So we're going to move on to pre-submitted questions. So I'll just pass back to Wendy.
Great, thanks very much, Tash. So we have gone through all of the main details of the call. So hopefully that's answered a lot of your questions already. But now we'll go on to answering some of those pre-submitted questions first. And we can begin. We've got a few people on the panel ready to answer.
So shall I start with the pre-submitted questions, if that's okay? Are we ready?
Go for it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we've received quite a few questions prior to today, both through our mailbox and also through your webinar registration. So we'll start off focusing on those before moving on to the live questions from today. Some of the questions which we've received, we've grouped together, and so that we can give a single overarching answer. And all of the questions, whether we're able to answer them today or not, we will collate and publish on the UKRI call page. So I will start with the first question then. And this one is around geographic scope and perhaps towards Tracy. So we've had quite a few questions around the geographic scope. And does the geographic scope of the research or the study sites have to be focused on the UK and the US and or Canada? And can we also include partners and activities in other countries?
Michelle, so no geographic location has been specified. So it is permissible that research and research outputs could be applicable to other countries. However, we'd like to stress that projects will be required to highlight the relevance and benefits of research that will bring to the funding of the partner countries, and the project teams must meet all of the relevant published eligible criteria across the participating funder countries.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tracy. So the next question is around a country balance. So if I could put this one to Andy, please. If you could talk a little bit more about the balance between the UK, the US and Canada in the programme challenges and the consortium teams. Is there a weight in terms of benefiting the UK or the US or Canada? And would it be more favourable if we were to include collaborators from both the US and Canada as well as the UK?
Okay, so there is no weighting to be applied, and the option to have either a bilateral or trilateral project gives that flexibility to the applicants to how they want to construct the team. So projects will be required to demonstrate how they're a truly collaborative, interdisciplinary international team that addresses the programme aims with the most suitable approach. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thanks so much, Andy. So the next question is around programme coordination. And if I can pass to Wendy on this one, it would be great to hear more about how the intended overall coordination of the funded projects might be envisaged and resourced. What support will UKRI give successful research teams to ensure coordination and collaboration towards addressing multi-region policy and practice priorities?
Thanks, Michelle. Yep, so with our kind of standard process for most of our programs within UKRI or NERC, generally, we tend to have a coordination fund. So what we're hoping to do with this program is the same thing. So following the end of the call, when we have the successful project, We will hope to kind of top up a fund to one of those projects to collectively coordinate outcomes and activities so that the projects work together and we can try to get the most out of the research that's funded across the projects that we have.
Thanks, Wendy. I wonder, would Kendra or Kate like to add anything to Wendy's answer?
For the Canadian side, we don't have a separate fund, so any expenses that would be required for the Canadian researchers to say go to an annual cross-program meeting that may occur, or coordination, any expenses should be included in your budget and justification and would come out of the grant.
So just to add as well that we don't have full details of how this coordination fund will look at the moment, but we are in the process of doing this. So we'll be sending details or publishing them on our website once we've worked out exactly how that will look. But there will be support for this coordination.
So the next question, staying with Wendy and support from Kendra and Kate, is around favourable remits and the interdisciplinary nature of the research. And people are wondering whether there is a preferred or an encouraged configuration of disciplines involved, and wondering whether including environmental science is a must, or whether environmental science would be expected to lead, and whether proposals which combine engineering, hydrology, governance, social sciences, Indigenous and community knowledge, and participatory approaches would be viewed favourably, and whether there's expectations regarding the balance between any natural science and social science within the interdisciplinary teams.
A long question.
Yeah, sorry.
So in terms of UKRI, no, there's no kind of preferred set of remits or disciplines to be involved. The only thing that we're really strongly encouraging is that all projects are interdisciplinary, and that's kind of within countries and across countries, so that we can get the best out of the projects that you're putting forward and the best out of the research. In terms of UKRI, so NERC is the lead administratively, but there's no, all councils are equal in terms of our remit, so there's no preference to have environmental science as the lead for the UK element, or environmental science kind of involved at all, although I'm sure it will be in most cases. But yes, so on the UK side, no, it's just what's appropriate for the research that we're putting forward to allow it to have the best impact that it can.
Kendra, sorry, did you
want
to do it?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit of context there. I mean, that was an interesting question because it ended up being a very long list of like all science disciplines. And I think, what you're seeing here among the funders is that we are creating opportunities for many science and engineering areas, right? We have purposefully broken down a lot of the silos within the disciplines, but I think there's it's up to each research team to figure out. It can't, probably projects aren't going to cover every single science area, right? That would be unrealistic. And so I think it's up to each project team to identify, the best synergies among themselves and other disciplines, to think about where the innovations really need to happen. The topic of focus here, the wildland-urban interface or rural-urban interface, whatever you'd like to call it, is inherently interdisciplinary. So I think I would just encourage researchers to think about what are you trying to study, and then who do you need to collaborate with? Because there's also, the previous question was about the international balance, right? So there's also the potential to form a bilateral or a trilateral international research collaboration. So I think I'm just encouraging research teams to be very mindful of their formation and not think so much about what are we looking for? What's the balance? I mean, this is going to be a peer-reviewed process led by the UKRI, and we're going to be looking for projects that have, a really powerful combination of research areas that are effectively addressing a research question. So that would be my answer to this, because there's plenty of other funding opportunities that are, NSF and NERC, right? There's many existing funding opportunities in that space, right? And this is not that. This is a different funding opportunity. So just want to be really, really clear that these project teams need to clarify exactly what advances are going to be made in the bringing together of the science areas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kendra. Kate, is there anything you would like to add? Okay.
No, I think that's
well
covered.
said. Thank you. So the next question then, please, is I think is one for you, Kate, which focuses on Canada, a Canada-specific question. Can Canadian colleges, polytechnics and applied research centres participate as eligible Canadian applicants under this call, or is eligibility limited to university-based researchers? And if colleges or polytechnics cannot apply directly, can they participate as collaborators, partner organisations, subcontractors, or through a university-led Canadian team?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So the Canadian project lead, who will be the Canadian applicant for NSERC, SSHRC, CIHR grants eventually, needs to be a university researcher, primary affiliation at a Canadian university that holds full institutional eligibility for NSERC, SSHRC, or CIHR. But that's just the project lead. So yes, college faculty can be co-applicants. In the teams, sort of similar vein to the previous answers of however makes sense for the research team to whoever it makes sense to include. It's about strengthening, the ability of your project to address a really interesting and innovative research question, and you want to have the right people on the team for that. So I think that broadly that answers the question, but if anyone has specific eligibility questions for the Canadian side, I know we always have everyone always has specific rules. You can reach out to us by email.
I think so. Again, this is a US and Canada kind of specific questions. I feel like we are, as a collective, answering these in the main. But what is the expected role of Canadian and US participants within the UK-led application structure? What is the expectation of collaboration with US and Canadian universities, as both US and Canadian partners have to put in individual applications? What collaboration costs can be included and what cannot be included? We'll start with Kate, if that's okay, for Canada.
Sure. So I think we've addressed it more or less, though. There's no expected roles per se. It's whatever makes sense for the project. Just can choose how to organize the collaborative activities and sort of who's in what role. Administratively, UKRI is of course leading, and there's the UK project lead. And administratively, both Canada and the US would have their project co-lead identified, but beyond that, not restricted.
Thank you. Is there anything which anybody else from the panel would like to add? Kendra? I think we are kind of, sorry, Karen.
Go ahead.
I'm saying I just think collectively we are, I think we are giving the answers, the collective answers, perhaps already coming across in the previous questions, but please, if there's anything you'd like to add, please do.
Could I add that the question towards the end there mentioned individual applications. So just to clarify, there is one collaborative application that details the sort of entire project, including US and or Canada components. And then once the assessment process is over, there will be routes to then sort of seek funding. But I think we come on to that in a later question. But it is not, it's sort of individual applications. It's one collaborative one.
So next question is asking for the Canada component, are municipal, emergency management, Indigenous, industry, public sector, or applied research partners encouraged? And can their in-kind contributions, such as field access, operational expertise, data, or demonstration sites, be included?
Sure. So I can speak to this. So collaborators and partner organizations from outside academia, so from different sectors, are permitted and not necessarily required for the funding opportunity. It depends again on the research question sort of being asked and answered. But where appropriate, projects are definitely encouraged to directly engage with relevant stakeholder groups who are outside of academia to strengthen the impact. And again, if we come back to the aims, the aims of the research call, that aim 3 about solutions and interventions, obviously that goes into the real world, that goes outside academia as well. So in that sense, the whole funding call, I think, is encouraging research teams, however they feel appropriate, to address those aims. On the Canada side specifically, the tri-agencies would always encourage, where appropriate to the proposed research questions or activities, the research should be informed by local knowledge or lived experiences, understanding of wildfire from disproportionately impacted populations, from First Nations and UMAT perspectives, like all of that sort of thing. So it does depend on the research being asked, but broadly speaking, including outside academia is part of potentially the aims of this call. And there is no, just to answer the part about in-kind, and I mean, UK would have, as the lead, would have their own partner rules, so you are welcome to add Wendy or whoever after this, but there's no specific cost sharing requirement from the partner organizations, no specific like in-kind minimum that I think needs to be met, but of course, if a partner organization is involved, they have to be involved somehow. So up to the applicants to make it clear how that's happening and how it makes sense for the research.
And Andy, is there anything you'd like to add from a UK perspective? Oh, sorry, Andy, you're on mute. Sorry.
About that. So standard UKRI eligibility applies to this funding opportunity. And so if there are those who are not eligible for funding, they can be involved in the application as project partners. So project partners a self-funded collaborating organisation that will have an integral role in the proposed research. So this could include direct cash or in-kind contributions, such as expertise, staff time, or use of facilities. Project partners that can be from industry, academia, third sector, or government organisations in the UK or overseas.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. Move on to the next question, and this is around partnerships. When considering partners, can we involve European partners and specifically European site test cases? And Wendy, are you happy to answer that one?
Yeah, so funding can only be used for team members that are eligible for funding from UKRI, NSF, NSERC, SHERC, or CIHR. So in the case of UKRI, this is only for researchers that are based in the UK, except for a specific cost for project co-leads from Norway. The UKRI International Project Co-Lead policy is not applicable to this funding opportunity, so please check the rules on that. Researchers that do not meet these criteria can still be involved in the way that Andy's just mentioned as project partners, and those people would be self-funded. So there's no kind of geographic location specified, but projects will be required to highlight the relevance and benefits of the research. So if you want to include research for partners from Europe, you'd need to kind of make a case for how that is benefiting the countries that are involved in this programme.
Thank you. So many thanks for your answers. And if anybody has submitted, pre-submitted a question to us and we haven't managed to get to it today, I do apologise. But as mentioned, we will be collating and providing responses to all questions. But perhaps we could spend just a couple of minutes now answering some of the live questions that have come into the panel. So I'll pose the question, and please, anybody on the panel is free to answer. So are there any ways to find potential partners from the US and the UK who work on wildfires or share similar interests?
So I can go first if you want. So as I mentioned earlier, we've collected all of the contact details and biographies for all of you that have joined this webinar. So we'll be circulating those to everybody on this webinar afterwards, so you can have a look at that for people that might be kind of good partnerships. But then as well you can kind of contact us at our organisations to see if there are other ways in which we can help to grow the relationships. I'll pass to Kate or Kendra if you have anything to add from your side.
Well, I would just add, it's this is a great question, right? Like finding partners, especially with letters of intent due in very short notice here could be difficult. I would just point for the US research community, there's just been a lot of different workshops and papers and kind of community organization efforts. So I think I would start there. And also I put the NSF awards search. If you're looking for a particular type of researcher in the US, you could easily look there. Or that Wildland Fire Science page could point to some particular projects. So that would be my suggestion. But I like this idea of, certainly the people who registered for this webinar would be maybe a good starting point as well.
Thanks, Kendra. So the next question is a Canada-specific one for Kate. And the question is, do NSERC, SSHRC and CIHR make their decisions independently or jointly?
Yeah, sure. So as Natasha kind of spoke to, everyone, all the funders involved will be jointly deciding on the projects to award out of this opportunity. So it's one collaborative program. So in that sense, it's not just NSERC, SSHRC, CIHR making the decision jointly, it's also UK, RI, and NSF, and together will come with the funding decisions.
Thank you.
And if I just add to that, Michelle, sorry.
Sure.
Just to say that, as Kate explained, there'll be that panel process, but also the expression of interest stage is the thing that will help us to kind of work out if projects are kind of fulfilling the criteria of the programme. So once you've gone through that EOI stage, then all funders will agree that it's kind of eligible in terms of the project that you're putting forward, and then it will be then the collective panel that will decide on the quality of the science and which proposals we should fund. To kind of add that.
Great, thanks, Wendy. One for Kendra, and it's around the NSF fire programme. And the person is asking, did I understand correctly that current or future NSF fire funded projects are completely separate from the matching that NSF will do?
Yeah, I was worried maybe I was confusing people with talking about the NSF fire program. I think it's best to think of this funding opportunity. It is published on the UKRI website. It has descriptions about what is being looked for. we've worked with our partners here to develop that language. And I think just focusing on that, this funding call, this trilateral funding call is a good idea. I think why I was bringing up the NSF fire program is that it's context, right? It's a opportunity that we've developed as an agency to kind of start making some investments in this WUI research area. So I think I was trying to provide some helpful context for this program, but I would point everyone toward the UKRI-led opportunity as what we're talking about today and what we kind of have in front of us. You could reach out to us via email at wildlandfire@nsf.gov if you're interested in the NSF-led fire program, and that one is in flux as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much for the clarification there, Kendra. So we have many, many more questions. And like I said, I think we are running out of time for today's webinar, but they will be attended to, and we will be publishing the answers to those questions. So I'd like to bring the panel questions to a close and move on to the next item, which is next step. So if I could pass to Tash, please, if that's okay.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, just changing who's on screen. So for next steps after this webinar, we will publish the recording, and we will also make the slides downloadable from the Funding Opportunity webpage. There is a bit of a delay with updating the website, so for all that have registered, we can also circulate those slides via email so that you have them a bit quicker. We will also compile answers to all of the questions submitted to us, including those that we weren't able to answer in this session, and circulate these via email, as well as publish them on the Funding Opportunity webpage. You will have seen when you registered that we asked if you would like to provide a bio and your name, and if you would be happy for those details to be shared. So if you have consented for your bio and name to be shared with other attendees from this webinar for the purposes of networking and making connections, then that will be circulated as well. But if you did say no to that, then we will not share your details. So that is all for next steps. So I will pass back to Wendy.
Great, thanks very much, Tash. And so we've come to the end of this webinar. I'd just like to say a really big thank you to everyone that's attended. It's so great to have so much interest in this call. And a big thanks to my funding partners and everyone that's helped to answer questions today. We're really excited and looking forward to seeing what projects you submit. So thank you again. And as Tash said, all of the details will be published on the website and circulated afterwards. So good luck, and great to see you today. Thank you.